Please, Joel Zika is our first speaker. The first section of our symposium is tourism and experience.
If you're interested in haunted attractions, so the broader sort of space that dark rides exist within, you would know that there's been an explosion of location-based entertainment in the haunt and horror world. There seems to be connections between the local communities and the types of industries in those communities. Things like haunted hayrides, haunted pumpkin patches, appearing en masse and collecting in areas with very strong agricultural histories, areas that had strong agricultural histories, but they were on the wane. And I began to theorise that there might be a connection between the themes of haunted attractions, the themes of dark rides, and the histories of industry in those particular geographic locations. In cinema, especially horror cinema, but across most of cinema, we're aware of the research that goes into connecting location and place and community. The question I wanted to ask is, do independent dark rides reflect location and community through their theming? A quick recap on the history of dark rides. The first dark rides that ever showed up, so we're talking about carts that moved through spaces, were the Old Mill. These were a brand of dark ride, a type of dark ride, that utilised the spaces of old mills. The last remaining one was built in Kennywood in Pittsburgh, and it was built in 1906. So it uses the framework of an actual old mill using water propulsion, so just gravity and water, to ferry people through this space. Now, I've talked about that separately, but what I want to focus on today is the fact and the relationship between that ride and those themes and the community around them. So at the time that it was built in 1906, the whole of Pennsylvania had seen a massive downturn in its milling industry. Almost 70% less people employed in that area and hundreds of abandoned mills in the landscape. In this paper, what I wanted to try and do is see if this can be applied more broadly. Do these sorts of changes in socioeconomic structure affect dark rides that are around us? And have they then affected horror and haunt theming into the future? The problem with doing a study about old mills, for example, is that there's only one left, and it's currently Garfield's Nightmare. It's been completely rethemed. It's also a Nintendo SES game which centres around the nightmare that Garfield has from eating too much pizza, which is interesting and an interesting example of intermedia, but not what I want to discuss today. So I needed to find a theme that I could study and look at its connections to these sort of socioeconomic and geographical ideas. So mine rides. They seem to me to be the most common example of an industry-specific theme within this fictional haunted attraction media. And I looked for examples of mine rides, and I found a good study group. Not a huge one, but this is just the beginnings of a kind of concept. So here's where I looked. Again, you can download this and look more specifically. 7 rides across the United States, 1 in Queensland in Australia, and 1 in England. All rides that use a mining theme without an extreme amount of sort of fantasy. It's not, the magical dinosaur, laser beam mines. These are themed around an actual mining environment. And you can see that they still largely exist all the way across the US. The one in Australia is currently shut down. I had actually ridden it as a kid, so I counted that as well. What I thought I'd do is look at those rides and then have a bit of a look at the nature of the mining industry in those areas and the specific theming and aesthetics that happen in each of these dark rides. So what I found was that all the sites were located in areas that had a rich mining history. I mean, it seems simple, but a lot of this research is really necessary, I find, to establish with riders and other media people to think of the dark ride as being placed within this kind of field of study. So it happened that, yes, there was examples of mining, and there was also bespoke aesthetic traits that were informed directly by that industry. And I'll go into 3 of the case studies in just a second. The other thing that was important is that in every single one of these areas, the mining industry had massively declined. So it wasn't as if these were homages to a current industry. These were a historical record of a past industry. the EUREKA mining ride used an American roller coaster and inserted it into a kind of hybrid visual mountain space. So it was an American construction formatted to reflect a whole bunch of Australian traits about gold mining. Gold mining is a big part of Australia's sort of cultural history in the same way that it is in America. In Queensland, there was a rich amount of mining, especially at the turn of the century. What's interesting is that this mine was actually originally built in the 1980s, and although I don't have a kind of theorem as to the importance of this fact, it was built at a time when gold mining actually saw a resurgence in the 1980s. And it closed in the early 2000s as that mining boom kind of disintegrated. Now, that isn't really a fact that's of any great importance, but what we do see here is globally the same ideas about using rides to talk a little bit about history and incorporate them into museological kind of storytelling. Now, in terms of specificity, there is, in each example of these dark rides, there's a specific and bespoke reflection on the industry, but probably none so much as the flooded mine ride in Silver Dollar City in Missouri. These are rides designed around a local industry, so important culturally. I was sort of unaware of the level to which they really specifically reflected those industries. So in this case, lead mining goes through a particular range of processes, including extensive use of water and this idea of washing the kind of lead. In this ride, the structure, the path you take, it reflects that. It also includes information about various lead washing patents all the way through. But it's a narrative, fictional ride. It also includes inmates who have taken over the mine and are in there. You can see them, they're kind of passing by. And this was common practice in Missouri for mines to be flooding all the time. They're also underground, and all of these various factors of the way that a lead mine works were fashioned into this ride. Finally, my favourite and a really great example is the Golden Nugget and the Black Diamond. I'll explain how they're connected. So this is the Golden Nugget. Now, in New Jersey, at the turn of the century, had a lot of gold mining, especially in the areas onshore from Wildwood Amusement Park in New Jersey. And this ride existed since the 60s, and it was on the boardwalk, but it was built to look like an enormous mountain, mine carts going from the top inside of it. It's a beautiful old ride. It was really beloved. In the early 2000s, it was closed and it was going to be sold, and it was bought by Knoebels Amusement Park in Pennsylvania, not far away, but not an area that was known for gold mining. It was an area that's famous for anthracite mining. Anthracite mines are completely different. In a gold mine, you kind of start at the top and you kind of go into a mountain, and that's how the ride was designed. An anthracite mine is a covered kind of building, black, to keep all the kind of dust and coal and soot, and you can go deeper into the reasons for that. But what Knoebels did was they took the structure, bought it off the boardwalk, and completely redesigned it into the Black Diamond mine. It's the same ride. It still involves ride carts and that, but it's designed to emulate and to reflect and to celebrate what that area of Pennsylvania outside Scranton is known for. There's really no current anthracite mining in that area, and there's also very few people working at all in the area around Knoebels, so much of the theming is reflecting a lack of engagement with employment. It's a fascinating example, and the way that then those mine rides get transposed. This is not a talk or a research essay to help the amusements and attractions industry make better theming. It might not even make it more popular. What I'm trying to do in all of my research is to show the important history and the stored history that these sorts of rides contain in themselves. I want to elevate the discussion around location-based horror narratives. I want to take this research and look to apply it to the massively booming haunted attraction industry, which is now going to make about $8 billion, and represents the biggest growing in terms of locations of any other location-based entertainment industry. I think the dark ride is very formative in shaping this sort of storytelling, and I think that iconography such as the mine or other things like abandoned houses, I think a lot of that would have come from people's experience on rides, but it hasn't been explored. There's no books or other resources on this historic entertainment format. You can see more of the resources and the capturing of these ride places at the Dark Ride Project, which is where I store all the kind of ancillary research.